My first full-time ministry position, once I finished seminary, was being a solo parachute drop church planter. A church planter has a very simple mission, and that is start a brand new church. But you might be scratching your head thinking, okay, I know that, but what's a parachute drop church planter? I'll answer that question for you. That nomenclature, that title, derives from military imagery. We've all heard of these top secret missions where a soldier is dropped behind enemy lines, and he's all on his own, and he has to depend on his training. He has to depend on his wits to get the mission done. But again, he's all on his own. And that was my experience as a church planter in Cincinnati, Ohio. The West Ohio Conference of the United Methodist Church hired me. Okay, I had no experience planting a church. I had no experience as being a full-time pastor. They hired me to start a brand new church. And this was their recipe. They paid me the conference minimum salary, okay? They gave me a $4,000 expense account. They didn't give me housing. Not only did they not give me housing, they gave me no building to use to start the church. They didn't even give me a list of contacts of people that they knew in local churches that would have been interested in maybe leaving their church and coming alongside of me and being part of the mission of starting a brand new church. Oh no. Their idea was, we're going to send you to a few conferences, a few workshops and seminars, and then it's off you go, Keith. Good luck. It won't surprise you that that was the most difficult year of my life. But you know what? Desperation does wonders for your prayer life. And I can give the Lord thanks for that. But in addition to that, in the year that I was there, I got to be a part of some amazing ministry, a bread ministry to the poor, starting 2 different Bible studies in 2 different YMCAs. I started a small group in my apartment. You might be thinking, well, Keith, that sounds like a pretty good start, pretty promising for your first year without really having any help. The problem is that the expectations of the district were very high. They wanted me to have a church started with 150 people in worship after a year and a half. Now, folks, it didn't take me very long to recognize, yeah, that's not going to happen. That's certainly not going to happen in a year and a half. And that was very difficult for me. It bred desperation. I mean, it bred this sense of, oh God, what am I going to do? I kept going out there day after day serving and giving it the best I could. But I just had no idea how this mission was going to get accomplished. But God, in His faithfulness, delivered me from that position to one that was better suited for me. And you know what? It was something that I wasn't even praying for. It was not anything that I could even conceive of in my mind. Yes, I was praying for help, but I wasn't thinking about leaving the position. To make a long story short, there was a gentleman from my old home church, Scott Baldwin. He emailed me faithfully, asking how I was doing, wanting to get updates, wanting to know how he could be praying for me. Well, near the end of I'd say about 10 months being there, 11 months being there, he said, you know what? We've got an associate pastor who's leaving your old home church. Would you like for me to ask Lenny, the senior pastor, if he wants to hire you? Folks, I'd love to tell you that I spent a lot of time praying and fasting about it, but I just knew deep down inside, this was the Lord intervening on my behalf to deliver me. I said, absolutely, Scott. I'd be grateful if you'd do that. And I had a peace inside that that was the Lord at work. In less than a week, Lenny called me and he offered me the job, which led to 7 unbelievably enjoyable, fruitful years as an associate pastor that helped me make me the pastor that I am today. But the Lord intervened out of nowhere. And you know what? The Lord can do the same thing for you. When it seems like there is no hope whatsoever, when things are desperate and dire, the Lord can step into the situation and make all things right. We're going to be looking at a story like that where the stakes were much higher than trying to plant a church. Stakes that had to deal with survival of God's people in the northern kingdom. In 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 24, we find Israel, the northern kingdom, in dire straits. There is a famine in the land, and people are very hungry. People are paying exorbitant sums of money for unappetizing things, such as a donkey's head or even dove's dung. People are resorting to cannibalism. There's a woman who cries out to the king, not out of sorrow, but demanding justice, wanting him to do something. Why? She made a pact with her neighbor that they would boil and eat each other's sons. Well, this woman boiled her son first, and they ate and were satisfied. Well, I don't know if you could say satisfied, but they ate him. And then come the next day, when it's time to boil the other son, the mother had hidden that son. She couldn't go through with killing her son. And now we have this other mother who's mad, not feeling bad about what's happened, but just mad that, you know what, this woman has reneged on the deal. Oh, and on top of that, Aram has surrounded and laid siege to Samaria, the capital city. Ben-Hadad has brought about a crippling siege. The king doesn't know what to do. It won't surprise us that he's not a very wise king, and he doesn't seek the face of the Lord. He doesn't pray to the Lord and ask for deliverance. He doesn't call on all the people to pray and ask for the Lord for deliverance. He doesn't even turn to his army officers and say, well, waiting is going to get us nowhere. We could be going out to our slaughter, but we'll certainly die if we stay here. So let's hatch up a plan and let's try to break through this siege. Let's hit them where they're weak, where they're vulnerable. He doesn't do any of that at all. What he ends up doing is blaming Elisha. Now, we don't know exactly why he blames Elisha. We're not told in the story, but it probably wouldn't take us a long time to figure out why he would be mad. Because in the previous story, you will remember that Elisha has been supernaturally aware of what the king of Aram has been doing, where he's been sending his troops. And he's been tipping off the king of Israel so that the soldiers of Israel wouldn't fall into a trap, that they wouldn't be ambushed. And furthermore, Elisha works it out to where these enemy soldiers are stricken blind and brought right into the hands of the king of Israel. But he refuses to let that king slaughter all those men. He demands that they be given hospitality and they go home and hostilities end. Well, I don't know how long ago that was, but now those same people, or at least that same kingdom, is laying siege to Israel. And probably the king of Israel is thinking, I should have never listened to Elisha. I should have slaughtered those guys when I had the chance. And he makes a vow that Elisha will be dead, that his head will be removed from his shoulders sometime that very day. Unmoved. That's the word I would use to describe Elisha. I think if most of us were aware that someone wanted to end our lives, we'd be gripped with fear. We certainly wouldn't be unmoved. And furthermore, if we knew the person who wanted to kill us actually had the power to do it, like a king, we'd be absolutely terrified. And yet, that's not the case with Elisha. I'm going to pick up reading again in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 32. Now Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. The king sent a messenger ahead, but before he arrived, Elisha said to the elders, "Don't you see how this murderer is sending someone to cut off my head?" So it doesn't seem like it's a regular messenger, right? This could very well be an assassin messenger. Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold it shut against him. Is not the sound of his master's footsteps behind him? So it seems like the king is so mad at Elisha that he's actually following behind this messenger. It's like he probably wants to give Elisha a piece of his mind. Verse 33, while he was still talking to them, the messenger came down to him. The king said, "This disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" I mean, this king has gone from just blaming Elisha to now blaming the Lord for this disaster. But instead of pronouncing judgment, Elisha gives a prophecy of good news. Chapter 7, verse 1, Elisha replied, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." It's not necessary for us to know weights and measures and costs and prices. The main thing I want to communicate to you is that there's going to be real food, not unedible food like a donkey's head or like dove's dung. There's going to be real food available, and it's going to be sold at regular market prices. This is wonderful news. Verse 2, the officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of the heavens, can this happen?" He's expressing doubt. "You will see it with your own eyes," answered Elisha, "but you will not eat any of it." Who's ready to eat? If you're as starving as the people of Samaria in the northern kingdom, right now would probably be a really good time. But before we can do that, the question remains, how is God going to bring this wonderful prophecy to pass? How are we going to find flour? How are we going to find barley so that the people can survive? I mean, you have to keep in mind, this is the time of a famine. Food just simply isn't available. I mean, people would not cannibalize their own or eat all these unappetizing things unless they were pushed to the point of most desperate that you could possibly feel. So where is it going to come from? And furthermore, even if you know where it is, your city's under siege. It's not like the Arameans are just going to let you go get it. You know what? These are not problems for the Lord. The Lord is creative and the Lord is sovereign. And he often uses the most unlikely agents as instruments of his will. I'm going to pick up reading in 2 Kings chapter 7, verse 3. Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, "Why stay here until we die? If we say, 'We'll go into the city,' the famine is there, and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die." This is a brutal, simple calculus that these 4 lepers resort to. They've got 3 options, and 2 of them will lead to certain death. And then the third one, which is counterintuitive, going over to where the enemy is, that's their only real hope. And even then, they might die. But they go for it. Verse 5, at dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us. So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. So when these lepers actually go into the camp and not find any Aramean, but everything left just as it was, they find clothes, they find gold, they find plenty of food and drink, and they eat and they drink. They have a great time. And then they begin to feel guilty, and they begin to feel afraid of maybe being punished for just kind of keeping all of this to themselves. And so they feel like, you know what? This isn't right. We should go and report this to the king of Israel. And so they do that very thing. Well, the king of Israel is suspicious. He thinks there might be a trap, that the Arameans are maybe hiding and waiting for Israel to come out and try to get this food and all this stuff that they've left behind. Some sort of a trap, because they know that the people of Israel are starving. And so he sends some people out, and he finds it just as these 4 lepers say. So this is amazing news. People get really excited. The king puts the guy who accompanied him when he was wanting to go confront Elisha in charge of the city gate, where there's such a mad crush of people running to go plunder the camp of the Arameans that this guy dies. He's crushed to death. And this is how Elisha's prophecy comes to happen, that there's plenty of flour and there's plenty of barley, but it comes from an unlikely place where the Arameans were encamped. The Lord delivers Israel in a mighty way. This story presents us so many rich avenues for exploration. I mean, it would be very easy for me to turn this one story into a sermon series. Think about it. We could unpack this from the perspective of doing character studies on the various individuals within the story. I mean, think about Elisha for a minute. What would it take for us spiritually to reach a place of peace, to be unmoved, knowing that our life is in danger? I mean, what would that take? And think about the 4 lepers as a group. What does it say about the complexity of human motivation? I mean, these lepers have multiple motivations. In one sense, they're fearful of punishment. So that's a motivation to not hoard the Aramean plunder all to themselves, but to want to go and let other people in Israel know about it. But then there's also that part of them, that moral compass inside of them that says, look, this isn't right for us to just keep all this. There are people who are starving back in Israel. That would be a fascinating avenue. In addition to that, it would be interesting to look at human nature. I mean, we all fancy ourselves as law-abiding, upright, rational individuals. And yet, when we are in the most desperate of circumstances, we are capable of some heinous things that would just shock us, right? I remember overhearing a conversation at the gym years ago where this one gentleman was saying, you know what, we human beings can make it a couple days without food and water. But once we get to that third day, and there's nothing to eat or drink, all laws go out the window. We can turn into absolute savages to get food and water. What does it say about us as human beings? I mean, you've got the people in Israel, some of them resorted to cannibalism. Are we capable of that? It would also be fascinating to really unpack, what does this story tell us about God? You have a faithless king. You have disobedient individuals in the population who are undeserving of deliverance. And yet this covenant-making God chooses to deliver them. It's not like people are fasting. It's not like people are crying out to the Lord for deliverance, although I'm sure there were some people. But collectively, there wasn't a critical mass of people really doing that. And yet God saved them. I want to leave you with this. No matter how hopeless your situation seems, the Lord can rescue you from it. I'm not going to turn this into a formula. I'm not going to tell you that every time you face desperate situations that the Lord is going to deliver you. I'm not going to promise that at all, because it wouldn't be true. Jesus died. The apostles died for their faith. I'm even hearing reports that the Taliban, in their takeover in Afghanistan, are slaughtering Christians. God is not always going to protect us from suffering. We need to keep that in mind. And yet at the same time, knowing that God can deliver us, why not pray for it? Why not hope for it? Why not cry out for it? Who knows what the Lord can do? But my main point is the Lord can. I think many of us can adopt the posture of the king's official, that when we're going through a very difficult circumstance, and even when we hear good news, we can have doubts. I mean, think about him. He's like, hey, even if the Lord opens the floodgates from heaven, how is this possible? We can limit God, not just on what we can or can't do. We limit God based on what we can imagine, what we can conceive. But thank God, He's not actually limited by that. God can do whatever He wants to do. So why not pray to be saved, to be delivered, to be rescued? Let's go for it. He is faithful. I pray that He does intervene in whatever you're going through. And I pray your confidence in the Lord grow through that. God bless you.